Yalima with all the friends online. We welcome you all on Sunday morning and we invite our speaker, scholar ZahirL to speak on the part 2, the concept of monoreality. I would humbly request all the friends to please stay on mute and share your questions on the chat. Thank you so much.
Yalima, everybody. Can everybody see the presentation screen?
We can see the presentation, we cannot see you. And friends request to see you too. So
Is that better, Nimet?
thank you. We can see you in the slide. Thank you so much.
Good. Thank you very much. Yalima, everybody. So I don't know how many of you were here last week, but I'm just going to do a very quick summary of the main trend that we went through last week. And the fundamental thing that we spoke about last week was to do with the whole concept of how we think about creation. The term creation is used throughout in the explanation of our faith, in the explanation in the Quran, and every faith talks about this thing called creation. But the thing that we raised was that Imam has made some very subtle indications that the form of creation that we think about is actually maybe not quite right if we want to understand the deep nature of Ismailism. And one of the fundamental things that we went through last week is that there were two things that our general understanding of creation raises. For most people, when we talk about creation, there is a time of what we call pre-eternity, and then God creates, and then after the creation, there is a time of post-eternity. And this raises two fundamental issues. One is that relies on a progression of time, that God himself lives within time. And the second issue is that God is separated from what he creates. And that causes a fundamental problem with some of the key principles that we have within Ismailism, fundamentally within Islam. So last week, we went through a lot of those things of how we can bring about those issues, how those issues cause us difficulty in understanding some key concepts. And today we're going to go through and understand, hopefully, some elements of monoreality and manifestation. And I say some because this is a really huge topic. It's a very complex topic. And I don't think any of us, unless we've hit those spiritual heights, would actually be able to express that in enough terms to make it 100% clear. So I would urge you to take whatever we go through today as a beginning of a search, not as a complete answer. There is a lot to research, there is a lot to understand, but hopefully today we'll start looking at things that will ignite a few thoughts, ignite a few thought processes, and inshallah help us to change the way we see things and make some of those fundamental principles a little bit clearer in terms of how it is possible. So let's begin with that topic. So why is it important for us to look at this whole concept of monoreality that Sultan Mashah specifically has spoken about? And last week I referred everyone to a very specific farman of the Imams, which is known as Usul Din. And Usul Din has some very key elements in it. And one of the things that Imam talks about is what I've showing up on the screen, which is he talks about how a person may try and trace their ancestry. They'll go back many generations. A person who is actually more thinking may actually go all the way back and say, Adam was my first ancestor. But then Imam says very clearly, he will not be able to proceed any further. Will they ask the question, where did Adam come from? What happened prior to Adam? And then Imam very clearly says that the man who is a mystic, a Sufi, will be able to capture this trend of thought. And Imam's indication is that when we ask questions, we have to actually go very deep. The questions that are superficial will not give us the depth of the answer that we need. And when I've been going through this sort of material, when I've been looking at this from a personal objective, the thing that I always come back to is, why am I doing what I am doing? What is my purpose? Who am I? Where have I come from? And what is it that I need to achieve in this life? Whatever else we do, our jobs, our careers, our families, all those things are fundamentally secondary. The ultimate thing that we should be asking is, what is my purpose in life? Where am I to go to? And in order to answer those questions, those are really big questions. But the issue there is, if our foundational understanding of where we are, who we are, why we are, if those fundamental foundations are not solid, then our ability to answer those deep questions, to understand why we are here, what we are here for, where we are to go, becomes very difficult. And that's one of the things that I'm hoping we'll begin to address today. So let's dive straight into what Imam has said in the memoirs. Now, the whole of the memoirs, most people are aware, was obviously a book that the Imam had written for the world at large. But there is the one chapter within the memoirs, which is chapter 8. And in that chapter, the Imam goes into quite detailed length of our fundamental principles. And it is in this chapter that the Imam uses that word, monoreality. So there is no better book than the memoirs to actually understand what the Imam meant. But the Imam also made several other points that help us to go back over our general understanding. So let's look at this one paragraph. So the Imam talks about the difference between Islamic monotheism and Jewish monotheism. And by inference, he was also talking about Christian monotheism. And the Imam says that Jewish monotheism has retained two characteristics which render it essentially different from Islamic monotheism. God has remained, in spite of all, a personality. Sorry, I beg your pardon. God has remained, in spite of all, a national and racial God for the children of Israel. But the important part is, and his personality is entirely separate from its supreme manifestation, the universe. His personality, the personality of God, is entirely separate from its supreme manifestation, the universe. Now, the Imam's use of English is really powerful, and we need to delve into that one phrase in quite a lot of detail. There are two things the Imam says here, and we actually have to take the opposite of what he's saying here as to what Islam believes. Remember, here he's talking about the belief that drives Jewish monotheism, that God's personality is separate from its supreme manifestation, the universe. So the first thing is, Imam doesn't talk about creation. He doesn't say God's supreme creation. He says God's supreme manifestation. And the second thing he says is, unlike Jewish monotheism, we do not believe that God is separate from his manifestation. Now, again, you'll remember some of the things we spoke about last week. If he were to use the term creation in itself implies a separation between creator and creation. And the Imam is very careful not to use that term in order to drive home the point that there is actually a connection between who we call our creator and this universe. He uses the term manifestation. So what else does he say in the memoirs? Let's look at this other paragraph. Once man has thus comprehended the essence of existence, there remains for him the duty, since he knows the absolute value of his own soul, of making for himself a direct path which will constantly lead his individual soul to and bind it with the universal soul, of which the universe, as much of it as we perceive with our limited visions, is one of the infinite manifestations, one of the infinite manifestations of the universal soul. Thus, Islam's basic principle can only be defined as monorealism and not monotheism. So remember, the general context that we place ourselves within the religious context is that we are one of the three monotheistic faiths. We call ourselves a monotheistic faith. But Imam now introduces a new level for us to look at Islam from, and that is that Islam actually believes in monorealism, not simply monotheism. And the connection of these two words is fundamental. The connection between manifestation and monoreality is critical in our understanding, because if we continue to talk about creation with its normal context that we have in our day-to-day world, we cannot understand what the Imam meant by monoreality. And let's look at one more extract. And I think we spoke about this last week. The creation according to Islam is not a unique act in a given time, but a perpetual and constant event. Creation according to Islam is a perpetual and constant event. God supports and sustains all existence at every moment by his will and his thought. Outside his will, outside his thought, all is nothing, even the things which seem to us absolutely self-evident, such as space and time. So firstly, the Imam talks about the fact that creation is not something that we drew out in that line. It is not something you can pinpoint to as saying, that's creation. It is a never-ending process. But what he also says is outside God's will, outside God's thought, all is nothing. And again, if you think about creation, creation implies a separation of the creator and the creation. But what Imam is very clearly pointing to here is that everything we see, everything around us, is part of Allah's will and his thought. And if you remove the origin, you remove all of that. And we'll come back to that in a minute. So let's try and understand a little bit more about creation. So a typical way for us to understand creation is a carpenter making a bird table, for example. Okay, the creator will use his skills, he will use his carpentry skills, he will use his judgment, he will use some of his own personality to put into the bird table. When one sees the bird table, one will understand the skill of the carpenter, and there may be some indications of what the carpenter was thinking about when they made that bird table, because there may be some artistic impressions, there may be some of the curvatures they use that explains to you how the carpenter thinks. But it wouldn't give you much of an insight into the personality of the carpenter. But the important bit is that if we remove the carpenter from this picture, if we remove the creator from this picture, the bird table remains. There is no connection between the carpenter and the bird table once that work is finished. And likewise, if I remove the bird table from the picture, the carpenter still remains in their full glory, but what he has created disappears. So how do we begin to understand what manifestation is about? So one of the ways that we can begin to understand something about manifestation is thinking about a reflection rather than a creation. Now, if you think about a reflection will show many of the attributes of the thing that is being reflected. When you look at yourselves in a mirror, you will see quite a good impression of yourselves. You won't see the three dimensions. You won't see your inner thoughts, but you'll see a fairly good image of yourself. So the reflection gives you an awful lot more information about the origin than the creation process does. Now imagine if our only way of seeing is through this mirror. That is the only way we can begin to see things. If we remove the origin, that person standing in the picture, the reflection disappears. Nothing exists. There is nothing to see. And if you remove the mirror, and hence our ability to see, you remove the ability to understand that person that was trying to be seen. And this actually goes back to a hadith which says, I was a treasure unknown, and I desired to be known. So I created a creation to which I made myself known, then they knew me. I was a hidden treasure. Now, this hadith in itself has incredible depth in it, and it would be another entire session just to look at the details of that. But these are just indications about how we can begin to unravel this whole process of creation and manifestation. So let's look at what else Imam said about manifestation and this whole concept of reflection. And in the memoirs, he quotes, Imam Hassan has explained the Islamic doctrine of God and the universe by analogy with the sun and its reflection in the pool of a fountain. There is certainly a reflection or image of the sun, but with what poverty and with what little reality. How small and pale is the likeness between this impalpable image and the immense, blazing, white-hot glory of the celestial sphere itself. Allah is the sun, and the universe, as we know it in all its magnitude and time with its power, are nothing more than the reflection of the Absolute in the mirror of the fountain. So if we go back to this image that we had here, on the one side, you've got the full white hot blazing glory of the Creator, of Allah. And on the other, you have the entire universe, which is actually a reflection in some way of that Creator. It is a reflection. And remember what we said about a reflection. A reflection shows you many of the actual attributes of the Creator. It doesn't show you everything, but it shows you more than you would with just a simple creation. And that is what the Imam is referring to here about the whole concept of the reflection and the reflected. So let's go another step to understand how else we can understand manifestation. And I think we did this in one of the previous sessions, is looking at a thought experiment. Now, imagine that we had a dark box with 4 sides, and we placed 4 people, one on each side of the box, and all those people could see was directly in front of them, seeing their side of the box. Every side of the box had a different picture that appeared in a different color. So as you can see in the picture, on one side we had red, we had yellow, we had purple, and we had blue. There were 4 different colors and 4 different pictures. And when the 4 people are asked what they see, each of them said that they saw something different and with a different color to the other 3. None of them had any compatibility in what they saw. They each believed they saw something different. But is that really so? Is that actually what they saw? This is one of the things about manifestation. If you imagine that box as being a light box, the light box contained a single white light. But each side of the box had cutouts and had filter paper stuck on them, so that what you saw was filtered light going through a shape. As far as I was concerned, I saw a particular shape with a particular light. That is all I saw. But the reality was completely different. The reality was that what you saw wasn't actually real. It was a manifestation of something deeper within the box. And if the viewer managed to poke their finger through the filter paper, they would have realized that once they broke that veil, what they actually saw inside was the white, bright light. But one thing that this raises about the whole fundamentals of manifestation is knowledge. Deep understanding and deep analysis to put things together. Remember, manifestation shows you particular attributes of the origin. In order for you to understand the origin, you have to take all the different things that you see and you have to connect them together. Now imagine if these four people understood the science of light. Imagine that they realized that actually white light is made up of components of the rainbow colors. That what I see in the rainbow is actually the different components of white light. Had they used that information and then put their notes together and said, well, actually, hang on, the light colors that we are seeing actually are a substantial number of colors from the colors in a rainbow. They could then decide to say, could it actually be that the colors we are seeing were broken down from something that is common to us all, and that was white light? But it would take that leap for them to try and look beyond what they saw, to go beyond and compare what each of them see and put them together and try and build a picture that was bigger than the sum of the parts. And this is what in Usul al-Din, Imam Sultan Mashar refers to as deep thinking. Let's look at another attribute of manifestation, and that is one of interconnectedness. Imagine in the far distance, we see a silhouette of two big hills. They are miles apart. We are looking from very far away. But imagine we notice that as the one on the left moves leftward, the one on the right moves leftward. As the one on the right moves back rightward, the one on the left moves rightward. They seem to be moving in sync. And we cannot work out how on earth these two big things that are seemingly disconnected are moving in synchronization with another. Is that magic? Or could there be something deeper? So let's imagine a scenario where it would explain what we saw. Imagine that what was actually there was a construct that was a large rubber sheet. And underneath the rubber sheet, we had a contraption that looked like what's drawn out on the left. It was two big steel girders that supported this sheet. And because they were poking through the sheet made some hump shapes. But that structure is connected. And as the thing moves, what you see in the silhouette is both things moving, apparently disconnected. But once you understand what is underneath, you realize that of course they're moving because what is driving it is one connected thing. Again, manifestation is about looking beyond what you see outwardly and making connections with different things to give more information. It's providing something greater than the sum of the parts. Now, we can talk for a long time around these kinds of scenarios, but is this really scientific? Is this actually what happens in the real world? Is this purely religious talk? Now, for those of you who are familiar with science, you will know more than I do on this, and excuse me if I say things too simplistically. But there is an experiment that science have done time and again to show something that was predicted by quantum theory, and it's known as quantum entanglement. And the theory goes like this. The light that we see is made up of photons, okay? So photons are the fundamental parts of light. And they have done experiments to take a single photon and split that photon in two. And these two parts of the photons go hundreds of yards away from each other, if not miles. They go very, very far away from each other so that there is no physical connection between them. And what they found is that when they interacted with this particular photon split on this side, the other one reacted the other way. And when they did something to that one, this one reacted in the opposite way. There was a connection. There is a connection over miles of distance with no physical connection apparently between these two things. How? Another thing that can try and help us to understand, and again, this is modern science. We all know the concept of dimensions. Okay, when we take a piece of paper that's flat, that is 2 dimensions. If we draw a line, that is 1 dimension. If we draw a cube, that is 3 dimensions, and so on. But what's the important thing about dimensions? If I draw a line, how much information can I tell you by just drawing a line? There is a limit of how much information you can expose in a 1-dimensional mode. If I now go to 2 dimensions, I can provide you a lot more information by drawing things in a 2-dimensional plane. But if I jump to 3 dimensions, I can draw you even more things that will help you explain the reality of what I'm trying to explain to you. So the higher the number of dimensions, the more information we can provide, the more information we can garner from that expression. And there is something that has been, for the last 20 or 30 years, one of the forefront of science, and that is known as string theory. There are many forms of it. There are many variations that are saying slightly different things. But the fundamental thing that I want to raise in here is that what string theory says is that the 3 dimensions of space and the 1 dimension of time that we see around us are actually not everything that exists. There are, behind all of that 3 dimensions plus time, there are a number of hidden dimensions. And the most popular of those theories say there are 10 or 11 hidden dimensions. That the information that you're seeing in your 4-dimensional view is a very limited amount of information. There is far more information behind this because there are 10 or 11 dimensions that produce what you see today. And the interesting thing is that in many of the books and the articles I've read on this, the term they use is manifestation or manifested, that those hidden dimensions manifest as 4 dimensions of space and time. So what Imam has been talking about is not mumbo jumbo. The terminology he's used is the terminology that science is using. I'm not trying to make this about what Imam said is the same as what science says. This is about using science and our current understanding to help us to try and visualize what the Imam was saying about spirituality, about monoreality. It is using these things to our benefit to help us to understand better. So that takes us to understanding a little bit about how we can understand manifestation. What is this thing called manifestation? How do we visualize it? How is it different to creation? The next part we want to go to is how do we use this understanding to now look at some of those key principles of the faith? And how does it explain monoreality? We all use terms like oneness, like fanafila, like return to God, like spirituality. But in many cases, those terms are used in a very, very superficial way, without a deeper understanding of what they truly indicate. So let's go back to the first thing that one of the things that we spoke about, which was this whole concept of a constant and perpetual event. Now, if we look in the Quran in Surah 2, Ayat 117, this is the ayat that talks about kun, where Allah says be, and it is. And connect that with this whole concept of creation being a constant and perpetual event. When we, within our minds, try and visualize kun, we try and visualize it as an act that occurs within a time. But God does not work in time. There is no timeline. So the point behind kun is that kun is what the Imam had referred to as outside his will, outside his thought, all is nothing. Kun is the will of God. And that will is manifesting all the time as everything that you see around you within the entire universe. And in fact, the Imam talks about multiple universes. So the process of kun is perpetual. Kun itself does not work within time, but manifestation, just like string theory says, manifestation is the world around us, which includes space and time. God is not bound by time. Kun cannot be bound by time. But the manifestations work within time. Another important aspect of this whole concept of monoreality is knowing the Imam. Now, there are far better people than me who can know more about the Imam. But the important thing to state today is to understand, how does the Imam come into this picture of monoreality and manifestation? Now, in the Quran refers to this origin, the world where kun is said as the world of command. And the manifestations is the world of creation. So you have these two things. You've got the world of command and the world of creation. The manifestations that we see, everything around us, the entire universe, whatever we feel, breathe, speak, hear, these are all manifestations. And these are different perspectives of one thing. I'll use the term thing. Just like that box with the 4 sides, those 4 colors and 4 shapes were different manifestations of one thing. Everything in this universe is a different manifestation of one thing. Monoreality. Look at Surah 36, Ayah 12. وَكُلَّ شَيْءٍ أَحْصَيْنَاهُ فِي إِمَامٍ مُبِينٍ. The manifest Imam. The Imam himself is a manifestation of that same origin. He has a body. He is manifest. But the key difference is that the Imam straddles the confluence of these two domains, the world of creation and the world of command. He straddles these two domains and he sees the entirety of these two domains, unlike you and I. For the Imam,
very good at testing and then tracing.
For the Imam, that box doesn't have any filters. The filters don't exist. That white light is all that exists. But he sees all the things that white light produces. He knows the secrets of the manifestations and he knows the origin. He knows that everything is part of this one monoreality. For the Imam, the veil is gone. And that is the whole concept of a divine guide. A divine guide is of no use to you and me if he doesn't understand the true reality of the final destination for all of us. The Quran talks about the divine guides being role models. That is what a role model is for. They have been there. They know what they're talking about. And unless we know the Imam as the current divine guide, we will find it very hard to get to that origin. So, something else that we spoke about last week. 2 sayings of Hazrat Ali. Do you consider yourself a small body when the entire universe is contained in you? This body how can this physical body contain this entire universe, which is billions, trillions of miles wide? How? What was it the Imam was saying about this universe being contained in me? If you consider that concept of monoreality, the concept of manifestation, this body is a part of the manifestation of one origin. This entire universe is a manifestation of one origin. If I can understand that origin, if I can enable that origin to be visible, to be apparent, to be real to me, then everything that is manifested from that origin is within me. Then we have the other saying that we raised last time. He who knows himself knows his Lord. It doesn't talk about he who knows the Prophet. It doesn't talk about he who knows the Imam. Imam says he who knows himself knows his Lord. Again, this boils down to that whole concept of manifestation. When I'm looking at that box and all I'm seeing is a red color and a particular shape, I'm only seeing a very small part of reality. But when we look at that box or that mirror image, if we realize that that mirror is simply showing us a reflection, and if we can actually understand that we are the reflection, we are the reflection, then we will begin to understand that what we call God, what we call the Lord, we are all part of this manifestation. We are all part of that monoreality. That is what the Imam meant by monoreality. There is no difference in any of that. And what is the key to getting to that point? Remember that box with the holes and the veil? It is the process of Ismi Azam, our gift of Ismi Azam, that allows us to break this veil. And this veil is not external. This veil is internal. And it is Ismi Azam and the practice of that ball that eventually breaks those veils and reveals your true reality within yourself. And let's look at what Imam has said in Usulaydin. The Imam says, you can be like Pir Sadruddin, you can be like Pir Shams or Mansur. You can indeed achieve such a status. You can rise even higher. And that is the bit that has always piqued my interest. Yes, we can all aim to be like Pir Sadruddin or Pir Shams. It'll be hard, but the potential is there. But how can you rise higher than the peers? What is higher than the peers within our understanding of our faith? These are not my words, these are the Imam's words. But if we look at this through the lens of monoreality, through the lens of manifestation, then surely if all of us originated from one same essence, all of us originated from one same thing, then the peers are also manifested from one thing. The Imams are also manifested from one thing. It is the same origin that we are all a manifestation of. The Imam's role is to be a guide and a role model. If the Imam has broken those veils and is straddling these two domains and is the monoreality, the whole purpose behind a role model and a guide is to show each one of us, if you try hard enough, then you too can break this veil and realize the monoreality within you. That is a fundamental aspect of monoreality, one reality.